Well, welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Mr. Steve Cantwell.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Steve. Steve, now I say stand-up comedian, but I also know that you are running a business corporation, security.
I do. Yeah, I am the president of a little security company. That's just pretty recently, but mostly stand-up comedy.
Now, how'd you get into stand-up?
How did I get into stand-up? I got into stand-up. I kind of have been moving that direction ever since my divorce. You know the salvia story, of course.
Which
but,
we'll get to for sure.
Yeah. So what I did, I got kind of my interest peaked during that salvia trip. I was in a garage band and really enjoyed performing in front of people. And so when the salvia trip was over, I just sort of started doing that. I started kind of going out on street corners and busking, and then that led me to create a little show called the Grilled Jesus Show, which is I had this bicycle that I made that grilled cheese sandwiches that I had a picture of Jesus on each side, and I had a little bit of stand-up, but mostly a lot of like little songs that I'd written about the healing properties of grilled Jesus sandwiches. And so the Grilled Jesus bike, even though that was, I think by all accounts, a failure.
It sounds like somebody should have picked up that idea, man. Holy crap. I've heard of, like, with the little waffle maker, you make a Darth Vader on your toast or something, but that sounds awesome.
Yeah, essentially it was that. It was just a bike that had two presses on it, two like panini type presses that would press a picture of Jesus on the outside of the grilled cheese sandwich, and had sold some water that we called holy water and stuff like that. But I would set up on the beach on Waikiki in Hawaii and try to do that at sunset every night as a way of trying to capture some of that fancy tourist dollars. But
dude, I've been tricked too many times with those tourists, man. I'll never forget. I went to Hawaii and there was this like little small Chinese woman that she was selling these tikis, and I thought that they were like rare. You know, first thing you think when you're a tourist, and she was like $60. I'm like, no, it's the size of like a Coke can. There's no way. And like she ended up getting talked down to like $25, which I should have caught as that's a ripoff right there. So I bought two of them, and the next thing I know, my brother actually finds them at a CVS store for like $5, and I just walked by her and gave her this dirty look, like, "You son of a bitch."
I mean, that's just tourism, man. Tourism is, I get that. Tourism is tourism. Probably the world around. You probably would have experienced that same thing going to Paris and buying a knockoff reproduction of a Eiffel Tower.
You should have been selling your toast, man. Imagine, that's the pitch right there, is you will see Jesus in this toast. And then
it basically cured everything from hangover to cancer. And we made people big garish promises about the sandwiches and the holy water. Ultimately, the thing that brought it down was it offended some Christians, and they were pretty militant about it and kind of started chasing me off the beach. So that's why that ended. But then when that was over, I started doing stand-up comedy, just because the part of it that I enjoyed the most was telling little stories in between the songs. And so I first started doing stand-up comedy, and I would mostly do ukulele songs as my stand-up, and did that for a while. And then I stopped using the ukulele and just started doing normal, regular stand-up.
And what do you find? I guess one of your things about comedy is that interests me the most is probably my favorite type is storytelling. Like Steve Simone has stories about his childhood. Brant Tobler has stories about before all that kind of like crazy stuff he did. Same thing. Yeah. Reason why I love the Crab Feast. I think that makes it relatable more to the audiences when they can hear you talk about things.
I agree. I mean, there's something about storytelling. We've been listening to each other tell stories like that for hundreds of thousands of years. That's the way human beings first. That was the first entertainment way. Is we would just sit around campfires and tell each other stories. And so that is, for my money, the most engaging way to listen to stand-up is told in a story. Even when you're a storyteller, And even if the audience is not with you, if it's a difficult crowd or a noisy bar or something like that, even if they're not laughing every place that they'll laugh, at least they're quiet and they pay attention. And because they're listening to a story, and something in their brain knows that they have to be quiet, or they'll be lost, or they want to hear what's next. And so that just we quiet down like children when somebody starts to tell an interesting story.
I think it's also like the fact is for so long, and I only see the really benefit of this COVID situation when everything starts to come back to normal. I feel like it's going to be a reset. I just feel like for too long we've been looking and going to shows, going to events, and just trying to be frustrated at something, looking for something to speak up, waiting for. I think everybody's got a moment, or everybody's got a shot that they feel like they need to take when they go to something like this. Like, oh, I'm going to be the best heckler, and then maybe I'll get on stage, and that'll lead to this and that and this and that. And it's like, it's not doing anything, but really disrupting everything, and then causing a big stink where to the point where you are kind of nervous to even get up on stage, because it's like the only comedy has to either be storytelling or if you're cracking jokes on yourself, because those are the safe bets.
Yeah, that's true. And there's, I mean, and there are really no safe bets in comedy. It's all experimental. It changes all of the time. It just completely depends upon the situation and the audience and the comic. So it's just, yeah, it's the most challenging art form for sure.
Do you plan on heading right back into it once this whole situation's over?
For sure, yeah. I'm associated loosely with this legendary comedy club here in Houston called The Secret Group, and I've just been given as much time as I can to helping those guys get that place painted and cleaned and get ready. So as soon as we get the word that it's okay to start having shows, we'll be open that night.
When do you expect it to happen? Because like I know a lot of these businesses, like I know I heard you talk about some comedy clubs that had probably shut down, never to open their doors again. I mean, I just had that recently with a deep connection I had. I've been going to the gym every day for 7 years at this one place, and they just shut their business for good. So it's like I feel like I'm lost without a home. Like I feel like a random dog on the side. Like the time you lost your dog and he was swimming in that little channel. You know what I mean?
That's fun. I forget that people know all these different stories about my life. It's funny that you know that. He's like, what? How do you know that?
I'm not stalking you through the window, but I've heard some stories where I'm like, because you went from we went from being Mormon to going into comedy, and I'm like thinking, there's two things that come on my mind, especially during the pandemic, was like, has anybody told the Mormon people that there's a pandemic going on? Because I feel like they completely have been doing this self-isolation thing for a long time. And then the other one is, how do you find, like, is there that much comedy being Mormon? Or is it just like you started realizing everything you're saying that people would hear and be like, what? Like, that's funny because you don't know that? Like,
well, I was a preacher when I was Mormon. And so I had a lot of opportunities to talk to large congregations. So I had the opportunity every Sunday. I would get up and I would do, I guess, what you would call the homily, which is I would, have a topic that I would talk about, and I would try to be funny a little bit in those sermons. And I think that was probably my first taste of stand-up comedy, was making people laugh in order to keep their interest. So there is there was some, but Mormons by and large don't buy into stand-up comedy. Mormons kind of take an oath in the temple that they will not laugh, because laughing is seen as being ungodly or undesirable in some way. And so Mormons all, actually, the adults, take an oath in the Mormon temple when they get married, that they will, for the rest of their life, not engage in any kind of, my dog's coming in here trying to smell my breath, but that they won't engage in any kind of loud laughter. And so if you've ever been in a situation where somebody tells you not to laugh, it makes everything twice as funny. So that was kind of the experience that I had in being a Mormon preacher, is because everybody was trying not to laugh at church. It made almost everything you said funny. And so if you leaned into that at all, it was just like golden audiences everywhere.
That's like my middle school. I had two teachers, 7th and 8th grade. They were both married, and their last name was Hancock. And he would always be like, "Don't laugh." And I'm like, "You're telling me not to," and you're sitting there trying to hold it in and everything. It's like, but we consider it so weird. We consider laughter, at least a lot of people do, to be the best form of medicine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's needed. It would be weird that that's seen as like a crime, I guess. And
I think it stems back to people making fun of Joseph Smith back in the day. He was an object of mirth because here he was having all these wives, and he's got a magic golden Bible and all that stuff. So I think if I had to guess, that's probably where it came from. It's just Joseph Smith was tired of being laughed at.
when did you start noticing like certain memories that you had or certain things you said were particularly good stories to tell on stage?
The first time I ever noticed that, um, I had a buddy of mine that was headed out to Iraq with a bunch of his soldiers. He was a Stryker brigade up in Alaska, and they were kind of having a barbecue right before they left the next day to go to ship out to Iraq. This was the very first Iraq situation. Oh no, I'm sorry. This was right after 9/11. So second time we'd gone to Iraq. But these guys were all, they knew where they were going to be the absolute tip of the spear. They were leaving tomorrow. They were there with their wives and girlfriends, and they'd all been drinking. I was still a Mormon at the time, but this guy that was their sergeant was my neighbor, my next door neighbor that I was buddies with. And he's the guy whose gun room I went into for the salvia trip. But this is before the salvia trip. But I told a few stories. I told that poo-poo kitty story that I tell in the very final episode of the crab feast. I told that story around the campfire to those soldiers, and they laughed really hard. And that's the first time that I ever realized that, okay, maybe just telling stories could be enough.
Has this time in like isolation and kind of like just a little bit of social distancing and not really doing stand-up giving you any stories to look back on and maybe try and pick up as a bit?
Yeah, in fact, and I've been working on a book, and part of working on the book was making big lists of all the things that have happened to me in my life in kind of a chronological order, and just kind of that mental exercise of outlining the book has reminded me of, God, there was over 100 stories that I listed on a piece of paper of possible things to talk about in the book, and also that could be really interesting to talk about on stage. So I think the last 50 years have kind of left me with there's probably enough bad things that have happened to me in my life that I could probably mine that gold for the rest of my life on stage, just because it takes so long to take one of those stories and workshop it on stage until it's finally polished enough to where you're going to get laughs reliably in certain places. So I mean, to make a good 15-minute story that's going to play well on stage and be reliable, it takes me at least 6 months to polish that up, just in doing mics and stuff around. So stand-up is kind of a slow process, but happily I've had a terrible life, and so that makes it so that I have tons of material.
I think it's also about kind of changing your perspective too, because like you hear comedy like Joey Diaz's comedy where you're like, I haven't lived anything close to that guy's life. Like, I mean, I'm 22, but like I look at some of the stuff that's happened in my life and people always laugh like you should, do comedy or something. Like it's not really comedy material. It's more like it's just stupidity. It's just like the factor of like how you look at it in a perspective. And like what I kind of want to get to is like the drug trip. The reason why that was so clear to me was every time I've ever gotten high has never been a great experience, just with weed in general. I remember
Really
the one thing I guess because you do it too much. I mean, I usually do it with someone that basically does it every waking minute of the day. So I'm like, oh, let me keep up with you. Like I did a quarter-size dab the first time I ever smoked basically do a dab. And that messed me up.
Had a panic attack.
I got locked in the bathroom for probably 2 hours and I was just trying my best not to die. But
Yeah.
like, I mean, it's funny because there was a bloodhound involved, and that happened to be the same time I saw cocaine for the first time. So I was already so messed up. I was like, I'm not just going to add on to it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
when I always tell my cousin, because my cousin's always like, dude, let's smoke. And I'm like, man, last time I got high, my balls slipped into my asshole. And he just looks at me and goes, what? And it happens like, when like you're sitting and it's like you're kind of leaned back and kind of rock, whatever. I was in a car and the seats were heated and it happened to be during like October. So it was a little bit cold. So what I thought was like them slowly going back, and then I just felt them disappear and I thought they went, and I freaked out, dude. I wanted to get out of the side of the road, get out of the car and start screaming, man. So I've been trying to work that one over in my head. But when I heard your salvia story, my cousin told me I had an experience like that. And I said, what are you talking about? And he explains to me on a podcast for 45 minutes how he took salvia, went downstairs, and as he was drinking some carrot juice, before the carrot juice hit his mouth, he lived this whole life of a carrot, from the bird shit down into the plant to the soil to grow this carrot. I mean, 2 years, he said. And I was like, is that possible? Especially something that's legal.
It shouldn't be legal, and to my mind, salvia is one of the few drugs that should actually be regulated, because it just lasts too damn long. I mean, there's just story after story you can find on the internet of people getting stuck for years, ages, places. It just seems, even though it's not really lasting that long, it just seems to last too long, and that's the reason I've never gone back, is just because it's the bummer of the fact that, we got a decade to kill. Why not have a little puff of salvia? If I was terminally ill, or if I was in prison, possibly, those are the only times that I would revisit salvia.
I feel like that would be the best way to get people in prison, maybe their sentence over with quicker. Just give them like, here, take this salvia. The next, 25 years later, they have time to think about everything they've done and realize, like, hey, we just got you out of here in 5 minutes. Like, that's how you eliminate the criminal problem.
Yeah, you could definitely, because I sat alone for those 8 years that I was on that salvia trip. I sat alone and just really gave Mormonism a really hard think. At no time in my life had I ever considered the possibility that the Mormon church was bullshit, but something about that little time out that my brain gave me of that perceived 8 years, where I had a chance to really, without my family around or anything, think about whether or not I really believed in the Mormon church and whether or not it seemed reasonable to me as a truth. And I came to the conclusion that it was not true. So it's a very powerful drug, in that it will give you a timeout. It will give you a timeout as a human being and take you someplace and give you a chance to think. And possibly criminals need that. It certainly should be studied.
I don't want you to say the whole full story if you don't have to, but I got to hear a bit of it, because people are they're gonna hear 8 years and think, what the hell was he just getting high in a tree for 8 years? And I'm like, something completely different, and it's blown my mind. And literally, it reminds me of when I was a kid and I saw the movie Kill Bill and she was in the coma. I was like, is that what that is? Like, are people's brains just creating this scenario to keep you safe and keep you kind of held like a dream?
The takeaway from salvia is that it's a really powerful drug that we have been taking as a race probably for maybe 100,000 years. As long as there's been Indians walking through the forest, probably people have been trying plants out and seeing what happens, medicine men and whatever, to see what the power of these plants have. And that's a strong one that we've only recently rediscovered. But I took salvia thinking that it was spice, because my friend was coming home from Iraq, the same guy that I told the story to. He went over there on his first deployment, and when he was coming back for Christmas one time, he asked me if I might consider doing something that was a little naughty, but not specifically forbidden against the Mormon church, which is to smoke synthetic marijuana, which was spice. And he didn't know what spice was called for. He just knew he just knew there was some kind of a new synthetic marijuana, and the Army didn't piss test for it, and the Mormon church didn't know to ask about it. And so he and I might be able to have a really good time at Christmas when he comes back. And so I went to a head shop and asked for, I said, well, I want this stuff. It's not marijuana. And the guy goes, salvia? And I was like, yeah, that sounds right. So I got, a packet of 40 times concentrate salvia and asked him the best way to smoke it. And he sold me a really nice water bong and a micro torch and just set me up as how to smoke it. So I surprised my friend with that on Christmas morning, and we went downstairs into his gun room And I went first, loaded up that big bowl piece with salvia.
Terrible spot to do drugs, man. Let me just surround myself with all these weapons.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and he hit that big old bong full of salvia and just disappeared through his basement floor and came out on the deck of a little water ski boat on a lake in Tyler, Texas, coughing like I had almost drowned, surrounded by a bunch of guys who basically they were saying stuff like, "Man, we thought you drowned," you know, and but I just sat up and everything was as real as this world right here. The water was wet, the sky was blue.
Were you having like the emotions like when somebody wakes up from something and it's like, you know, your brain's barely thinking and somebody's asking you like a bunch of questions or something, you're just like trying to focus, you're just moving along, like what am I doing? Like, is that what happened when you were on this boat? I mean, you just smoked, for everybody listening, he just smoked and went into the floor and then popped out on this boat around people he's never met before, but they know him.
Yeah, they know me, have claimed to have known me my entire life, claimed that I grew up in Tyler, and are super freaked out about the fact that I don't remember them, because to their perspective, I was just water skiing. I fell off my water ski. I floated face down while the boat circled and came and picked me up. They hauled me unconscious into the ski boat, and then they didn't do CPR, but they just kind of, the process of being lifted in the boat made me cough and regain consciousness. And so to their perspective, they're super worried that I can't remember them. From my perspective, I'm in the same mind frame that I was when I walked down into that room with my buddy. I can remember everything that happened. I can still almost smell the food that's cooking upstairs.
You got your memories and everything from before.
Yeah, everything's completely intact. It wasn't like waking up after being unconscious. I slid seamlessly into that life.
Like,
and
went Indiana Jones into the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ask them any questions or anything? Like, hey, like if they know me so well, what's my middle name? And then you pull out your license and they guess a name. And you're like, damn, that is my middle name.
Well, I thought, I was very cognizant of the fact that I was on a salvia trip, and I just thought I was confusing salvia for marijuana, but I really didn't know what to expect about being high. You know, I was just kind of had an open mind about what it was going to feel like when I was high. And I'd heard about people having hallucinations on drugs. I didn't know that wasn't really a thing with marijuana, but I just assumed that this is what everybody experienced when they smoke marijuana. And they just go someplace and hallucinate a bunch of stuff. And so from the first moments of me being in Tyler, I was just laughing and not treating anybody like they were real. I was treating people like characters in a video game that you just kind of walk past and not even engage with because you know that they're not real.
You could have had that big dick confidence if you went to like a strip club, just been throwing it out like crazy.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that's just it was seamless. I was fully engaged with being amazed at how real this fake world was for at least the first 4 or 5 hours of it. I was all walking around and opening drawers and seeing if there was really something in the drawers and seeing how deep the simulation goes, and just and trying to talk to anybody who would, if I talked to anybody about anything while we were waiting in the emergency room, it was me laughing about how real everything was, which scared the hell out of my friends.
Like, you know, do you still remember the detail? Like what, like maybe like when you guys got out of the water, finally driving to the hospital, that whole trip, like that was actual time. Like if you were really driving. So like with all these things, especially when you were talking about when you were opening up the drawers and trying to check the prescription pads in the doctor's office and seeing if there was anything written on there, which is smart because I mean, that's the first thing, like your brain can't conjure up all that stuff. And you start seeing there's actual writing on everything. Everything's filled out. Like if you're in a simulation, did you, I mean, at any point, did you just start like, I mean, the amount of psychology that goes behind that, it just boggles my mind, especially when you're talking about like you were in there for a while. It's like eventually like what's real? Is this the life? Was I sleeping the whole time? I mean, when I went to school in my elementary years, my teachers told my parents I was mentally challenged. So I still think today, like sometimes I say something, someone goes, what? I'm like, have I been lied to this whole time where people think I'm normal and I'm not? I'm actually severely mentally handicapped and I'm just in this false reality or something?
Dude, so much of human life is perception and self-perception. It's just, it blows my mind to the degree to which everything is kind of plastic around us according to our perceptions, you know?
Have you ever, like, at least through the rest of the trip, like after going to the hospital, heading to your house, I'm guessing was probably the first thing?
Yeah, after the hospital, they took me to my house. They said yeah, the doctor said we'll just take him home, and he might regain some of his memories tomorrow. They explained how true medical amnesia was super rare. It wasn't like they show in the example he gave was it's not the way they show in soap operas. People don't just get amnesia and just can't remember anything for a few years. If you get your bell rung, he says you might forget for a while, but it will eventually return. So they took me back to my house, and I told them, I said I don't remember where I live. So they had to take me to my house, which was just kind of a shitty apartment. And that was a trip to go in there and see stuff that I clearly owned, and the kind of things that I would own, and the kind of choices I would make in clothes and food, and all that stuff was very very the same as I am now, but I had no memory of buying those clothes, wearing those clothes. There was photographs of me on the bookshelf that, fishing trips that I'd taken with these guys, and just, there's just the amount of detail and the depth of it, like yearbooks that showed me going through high school with photographs of me with friends that I had no memory of.
How
And
hard
it's
was it
just
for you to stay focused on this is just a trip? This is just a trip. I mean, I know you talked about for 4 years you didn't really do anything because it's just hard to, oh, this could end any moment. This could end anything. But after a while, you said you fell into it, like after the first couple of years. And then I started to look at, like, first thing I would do is probably try and just go to bed, just try and sleep and try and get this nightmare over with. But then I'm like, sooner or later I would start searching around. Like, I can't just lay in bed all day. Let me explore what's going on, drive this thing out, and like start looking around my apartment. I bet you my salvia life is better than my actual life by a lot. But I probably had, like, good food and, all this other stuff. Like, I got cable in here. What? Like, that whole thing. And I remember that's what you said. Like, you went to a job and everything. Like, if I was
yeah.
holding on to the mentality of that, like, that all could have been shattered at any moment. I mean, you held on for a long time. I think a lot longer than I would. I would immediately just be like, this is my life.
Yeah. Well, it was just because I had lived 4 decades in this other reality. So it was very real to me. I had kids that I was earnestly trying to get back to. After the first couple of days, the fun of it was completely gone. And then I was really kind of shitting my pants because I thought that the time that I was experiencing in Tyler was completely the same as the time that was probably happening in Alaska. So I wondered, like, am I in a coma in Alaska? Is this what being in a coma is like? Did I die? I just had every possible, because there's no place that you can go for answers. Like, first thing I tried doing was like calling my telephone number, calling every telephone number I could remember, trying to look up people in the phone book, just trying everything to try to get back to Alaska in
Did,
some ways.
did this make you want to change anything about your personality while you were in there? Like, you basically got this whole new act you can play. You could start, immediately start, just being a baller, have that big confidence or something, a lot different than you normally would.
Well, it changed my life in that it gave me the experience of performing in front of people in a non-religious way. Just being in a stupid cover band with my friends and playing at bars, and we played the county fair a couple of times, and just any place. We weren't making money at it, but it was just the fact that we would go up there and perform and talk to people and sing little songs. And I wasn't really telling stories at the time, but it made me hungry for that. It made me realize that was an important part of my personality.
When you start
Was
playing
that
Freddie Mercury, you're gonna get that
yeah,
confidence.
yeah. So I'd say that changed my personality. Also, it gave me time to really research the Mormon Church and to look up, because the Mormon Church, it didn't start 2,000 years ago. It started 200 years ago, and all during the age of newspapers. So you could go back in the newspaper morgues, the old copies of the New York Times, and there was articles that dealt with the Mormon Church and the founding of the Mormon Church. And basically explaining that Joseph Smith was a con man, which was the first time I'd ever heard that, and explaining that he had, that it's explaining that this whole thing started as kind of a sex cult, and that blew my mind. And so that was the first time I really allowed myself to actually explore the Mormon church away from my family and friends, because my family and friends weren't there. If I would have tried that in Alaska, the first person that would have found out that I was doing that would have stopped me. Would have told me that that's Satan, and that's Satan putting doubts in your head. Don't listen to the New York Times. They're a bunch of Satanists. But because I didn't have anybody around me to bounce that off of, I was really kind of left with just looking at it for the first time for myself.
Did you think that
it
was weird
that
life. Like the Mormon thing didn't follow you into the trip? Like nobody would come up to you and be like, hey, like you're not doing this, or how is this going on? Like you had someone, at least in Alaska, that was coming to you and checking on things too. So
right.
you think that was weird that you weren't seeing those same people again?
It was weird, and it's also very telling that I didn't search out any Mormon people in Tyler, and to my knowledge, never really ran into anybody who was Mormon in Tyler. And I think that's telling about my brain wanting to have a little bit of a timeout from the Mormons and really think about it. So even though I was still Mormon, technically, Steve Cantwell's still Mormon, but Steve Cantwell and Tyler, nobody expected me to go to Mormon church or knew anything about that. I was allowed to drink, but I never really drank. And so I just, it was weird. It was like a vacation from my own strictures of being a Mormon.
Kind of like Total Recall in a way. They put you in a whole new body, and you just start kind of experiencing your own little thing, doing things you probably wouldn't have done in your regular everyday life, or even took the shot to. I mean, that really brings it up to like a deeper meaning of it being like an inner reflection of yourself.
Yeah. Well, you're only reflecting yourself, because the reality is your eyes are closed and you're having a seizure and you're doing nothing but reflecting yourself in kind of a hall of mirrors. You're just getting distorted, extended, compressed versions of yourself every way you turn on a salvia trip.
And when you're going, spending like say first couple of years, when did you start to kind of really go into it, really start to live your life and realize this is the reality now? Because I think one of the craziest things is if you're a parent, most parents have a very strong connection to their kids. So that I knew that weighed on your mind. And that's what really convinced me that you lived this life, was when you started talking about how like you didn't know if your kids were real. You didn't know if you dreamt them up, and then crying when you did wake up. I was like, holy shit. Like to a lot of people, they would need evidence, they would need proof. And I was like, maybe if you wrote something down and stuck it in a wall or something, then went back or showed them the house and be like, see, I can walk you through every little part of this area. And like you tried to play some Freddie Mercury, obviously, to show your buddy that, you did experience this, which makes me think if I go into a salvia trip, learning another fucking language, because you got all that time to, you might as well come back with like a skill, but it's crazy. It made me so, I mean, when did that first realization of like, this is my life, I need to start doing, going out and doing and exploring things, working at the apple orchard, was it?
Well, the apple orchard, I stayed working at the apple. Only reason I kept my my job at the apple orchard was my friends forcing me to show up for the apple orchard job, even when I thought that it was, or even when I knew that it was imaginary. They still had made me show up every day and do it. And I would say they made me show up via peer pressure for a year. I wouldn't have shown up for work if I wouldn't have been badgered by my friends if I didn't show up. And then maybe the second year, I was just kind of begrudgingly showing up because I missed people and I missed being around people, and so I would show up for work just for socialization. And then because this whole time, like you say, you go from missing your family to grieving that you're not around your family, to realizing that you may have never had a family and that all of that was bullshit. And at about the 4-year mark, I convinced myself, because if everybody in town, anytime I'd go to the grocery store, I would run into people who, either taught me in second grade or was in a class with me or remembers me from when I was a boy. And it was just a big friendly town like that. And so 4 years of people telling me that they were in Cub Scouts with me, it convinced me. It convinced me that I did have brain damage and that I had really actually almost drowned. And I started telling people, if I met a new person, I would tell them, yeah, I had a bad water skiing accident and I almost drowned about 4 years ago. And so I don't have a lot of memories from before, but, I have this whole group of friends that I really love. So the friends that I could see around me just naturally became more real to me than my remembered life in Alaska. And once I started to accept my friends as being real, and that was kind of the linchpin that made it so that I could accept that my family in Alaska was not real, and that it was just. And I would tell people about this crazy hallucination that I had when I was unconscious in a water skiing accident, where I dreamt that I was a Mormon preacher and I lived in Alaska and I'd been in a witness protection program, and we would laugh about the outlandishness of being Mormon and being in a.
That sounds more like a dream than the apple orchard thing.
Yes, it does.
Oh my God.
So if you look at those two stories side by side, the real story seems like the kind of thing you would make up when you're in consciousness, and this dumb job where you work where you never left the town that you grew up in and work in agriculture and just get together with the same 4 or 5 friends that you've always gotten. That started to seem like a very normal American story. And so I just sort of, not all of a sudden, but gradually and almost suddenly, seeming at the 4-year mark, just started to kind of accept that I had brain damage and that my family didn't exist. And I stopped trying to find people that I had gone to high school with or whatnot to try to prove that I existed in Alaska. And I realized that was futile and that was just brain damage. And then I just started living my life in Tyler and started, finding things that made me happy. And one of those things was, playing the ukulele and singing in this cover band. And so I just took that as, I just grabbed onto that.
Is there anything you miss about the trip?
I miss those guys. I miss that town. I miss it. I'm glad that it's not real because I like having a family. But yeah, there are parts of me that it bums me out that it wasn't real.
Is there anything, I guess, coming out of it and everything and coming back into like the real world, is there anything you think back on then that maybe you try and do today, or you at least think about a lot about, maybe besides the guys, but like maybe a new way of, living? How did that affect you today?
Well, I think that probably the most enduring thing as a personal lesson that I learned from that is to not take anything for granted. Well, I'm haunted by the fact that all of this could also be an illusion. That there's we could absolutely be living in a simulation.
I think that's what deja vu is for sure. I feel like when that pops up, it's like, maybe that's a glitch in the system.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to think that if my brain is capable of doing that because I smoke a plant, then there is no reason to think that my brain isn't doing that just as a matter of existence, And so that's probably been the most haunting thing it has set me off on a path of just lifelong wonder about whether or not I really exist.
I think about that sometimes because, like you, I had a water skiing accident, but it wasn't water skiing; it was jet skis.
Okay.
I was hit by a jet ski from like the front. So if like here's my jet ski, here's the person. My head's turned to the side, looking off to the side. I was an instructor, and a dude going like 45 miles an hour went up me like a ramp. So the front of his jet ski, and as a guide, you stand up because you get a lot of spine problems from the compression of the waves. And he hit me in the chest, and I cartwheeled and cracked my head on the side of the jet ski. I didn't damage my head at all, but I cracked the side of the jet ski, the fiberglass. So my back was all shredded up. And there are times today where like I'll be sitting there, I'm like, did I make it out of that? Like, did I, like, is this my brain? Like, this is my, what they would call a heaven or something, just trying to get me through, like, you know, until I suddenly realize it and then poof, I'm gone or something. Like, it makes you sit there and think, and the next thing you know, you're like, I need to put the pipe down or something, but you know.
Yeah. I mean, if there are multiple universes, so physicists and theorists have said, essentially, if I'm not misunderstanding this, that every time a decision is made, it fractures off the universe into, like, what happened if I would have turned right instead of left,
The string
and it
theory.
just fractures and fractures and fractures. And there's no reason to think that you haven't died 1,000 times in your life, but just the reason why you don't remember it is because your consciousness is following the path of the string where you didn't die.
Have you ever tried maybe trying a different drug or trying something else after that? I mean, I know that's gotta be scary to even think about it, but like maybe
I've
trying
done
like,
the shit out of mushrooms.
so, and has this helped in your thinking of any of this type of stuff? Because I'm an insomniac, so like I don't ever sleep. So I get maybe an hour, 2 hours every couple of days, but that is the deepest sleep I've ever experienced. And my buddy sleeps with his eyes open, so I started studying sleep a lot. And what I think is rapid eye movement, when your eyes are shut and they're moving around under your eyelids, just the theory, hear me out. I think it's your brain searching for like that doorway they consider an alternate universe, or that parallel thing. And then when your body experiences a hypnic jerk, which is that like shock to come up, like it feels like you just fell. I think that's your brain slipping into something, and then your body trying to pull itself back, like you're going to go into that reality forever.
It's sordid, the fact that we have to sleep at all. There's no biological reason why we should have to sleep. That doesn't make sense, that everything in the world just powers down for a certain percentage of the day. There's no reason for that. So I've always found that suspicious. You know, this could very well be a video game that we play, and the time that we're sleeping is when we are not in the video game sim, but we're actually out doing whatever our real life is, you know. So, dude, I don't know. The one thing for sure is I don't know. And if this is here's the thing that gives me comfort. If this is a simulation, it probably was very difficult and very expensive to make it so that it didn't seem like a simulation, so that it was indistinguishable from real life, and so that we wouldn't be able to carry any of our memories in, and that we would never be able to figure it out. And to a certain extent, us having these conversations about this being a simulation is like standing up at a scary part in the movie and turning around to the rest of the movie theater and saying, "Don't worry, everybody, this is just a movie. This isn't really happening. It's just a movie. Don't be upset." Because maybe the whole fun of this life is to not know, and to be lost, and to wander. And I don't know, dude. I don't know what's going on for sure.
There's so many questions to even think about it when it comes down to it. It's like, if this is a simulation and you had to pay to get into the simulation, so this is the life I had enough money for? Like, it makes me think, like, you start talking about, like, is this a video game or something? Which makes sense. It's like, can I start doing random squats and jumps and crotches and barrel rolls and be able to do a cheat code that I get like $1 million in front of me or something? Like, that would be awesome. But like, there's glitches into the thing. Like, people talk about hacks of your life or something. They'll do like, you know, you can cook ramen through a Keurig. To me, that completely changes the game, because then I don't have to sit there and eat the dust packet and then put the ramen block in my mouth and pour hot water in. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting analogy for it. But yes, they just you don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going on.
When you're kind of, you know, headed back into everything here, the real life, and out of that zone and everything, what is the first thing, besides like, you know, waking up to your wife holding you and everything, and you had seizures and all this, like that 45 seconds, how scary was that for you to realize that 8-year thing, like the days on the calendar going by, you talking about that, like how hard was that for you to be like, no way it was 45 seconds?
That for some reason, it's still being Christmas and dinner still not being ready. And
where the hell is my
yeah, it was a very much like in the end of Christmas Carol where Ebenezer Scrooge like leans out of his window and is like, what day is it? Well, it's Christmas Eve, Mr. Scrooge. And that's what it felt like. Also auspicious that this would happen on Christmas for that reason. That in itself is weird as fuck to me. But it made me vow to not do salvia again, just because it was so. I mean, I considered for the first time in my life, I honestly considered suicide when I was on that salvia trip, because I wondered if that might be a way to get back to, to end the salvia trip, as if I was to kill myself in the trip, maybe I would go back to the floor of the gun room where my body
work. Like you get killed in your dream.
But in the end, I couldn't convince myself for sure that I was having a salvia trip. So I never dared do that, because I didn't know that there was going to be anything afterwards, and I didn't want to just stop existing. So, yeah, man, it's a mind fuck all the way around. And my life changed completely the moment that I woke up. I went into that gun room as a Mormon preacher, happily married for 20 years with 4 kids, and 45 seconds later, and my family had been in the Mormon church for 7 generations. Nobody had escaped in 7 generations. I went into that gun room, took 1 lungful of burning plant, and 45 seconds later, I was no longer Mormon. I wanted to be an entertainer and not a janitor, and I wanted, and I had a whole new perspective on the world, and that seems like magic. And I stood up and immediately started to change my life like that. I sold everything that I had, sold my house, sold my business, moved to Hawaii with my family so that we could successfully extract ourselves from the Mormon church, and just confidently started over, not being Mormon. I didn't have any of the hesitation marks that you see when people quit cults. I didn't have any of the problems with my conscience. I didn't have to talk myself into it. I came out of that 45-second trip having already done the mental work to talk myself out of being Mormon. From time to time, I'll find people that say, "Hey, did you make this story up? It's too good to be true." And I say, I can't show you pictures of what I saw and what I went through in Tyler, but what I can show you is the fact that a grown man changed his life completely 180 midstream after 45 seconds.
And I don't even need pictures or proof to know that, but all I know that's proof is when I hear you talk about it. You got to understand, like, I've listened to the Crab Feast. I think I discovered it probably about 1.5 years ago, but when I'm a big fitness guy, so I work out, so I'm always listening to podcasts. So every day I've re-listened to the Crab Feast, every single episode, and I've re-listened to yours multiple times, and I can hear the sincerity in your voice, the descriptive detail of a lot of the stuff, and I'm like, there's no way anybody that's even doing bullshit or maybe trying to lie or something could even make up anything like that, because it brings into a perspective. I mean, you hear people talk about when they come out of comas and it's like their brain was on a game show or this Truman Show scenario. It's like when our brain goes into a critical state, what is it trying to do? And like, even, that's not your first seizure after that experience. I heard the licorice story too, which is freaking insane, because there's also a thing with sugar-free Haribo gummy bears. I don't know if you ever heard about that.
No.
If you want a good laugh, look up Amazon reviews for sugar-free Haribo gummy bears. And I think the top one is, "This made my ass explode like Mount St. Helens." The type of whatever stuff they use to make it sugar-free, immediate diarrhea effect. I mean, and there's people eating 5-pound bags of them, so they canceled everything, but you can still get them on like eBay.
I thought you were going to tell me they make you trip balls. You eat a whole bag.
Wow, that might be better than salvia, though. But I mean, even like looking at all those types of things, the type of like sincerity in your voice. That's why when I reached out to you, I was like, this is the story I have to know. Like, I bet you've probably had to say it a million times, a bunch of people coming up to you, and you probably hate talking about it. That's why I didn't really want to focus on it. But I knew like I had some things I wanted to ask, and the way I've heard it was like, this is the drug story I send everybody. I'm like, you think you're high? Really? Like this dude, you start to look at things like in both your hands, like what the hell's real right now?
Yeah, that's the thing. You don't know what's real. This probably isn't. It's just, this seems far more scripted than it should be if it were just smart monkeys on a rock that's hurtling through space, in the wake of a burning gas giant. There would be a lot less written things that would happen to you. There wouldn't be the big the plot arcs that exists, at least in my life. This many things would not happen to me statistically unless this were in some way a manufactured experience. I've convinced myself, best guess, that I have bought some sort of a sim called Be a Stand-Up Comedian, and that's the game that I'm playing. It just seems to be what I'm doing. And it would not shock me to have to take the right drug or have the right experience someplace, or possibly at death, to just go into some other life. That sliding doors possibility of human existence. Now that I've experienced it once, it seemed very natural just to slide into somebody else's life. That could be what happens to us at death. That could be, we could just be playing video game after video game. God knows what the baseline reality is.
When it comes to both your lives, the one of the salvia trip and then the one here on this real, what we call real, is there anything that you were maybe trying to take away from the salvia trip, like such as like if you could have the salvia trip life instead of this one, would you? Or did you just already just had so much left here, like your children and everything? Like if you didn't have kids, if you were, let's say, in your 20s and this happened, would you want to stay in the salvia trip?
No, I think in every case, even my life before the salvia trip and my life now, both are better. My life now is better than my life was before, when I was Mormon. I like being a stand-up comedian a lot better than I like owning a janitorial company. And I like the friends that I have now more than I like the friends that I had then. I still got my family for the most part, except for my ex-wife, and I'm fine with that. And I'd say that the salvia trip was probably my least favorite era of my life, if I can say it that way, just because I was so tortured. I cried a lot of nights, and I was not happy for most of it. I became happier for the last 4 years, but not like I am now.
See, I got my birthday wish the day you got robbed, because New Year's Eve is my birthday.
Yeah.
So what year was that?
What year was that? That had to have been, it was mid-90s, so I want to say New Year's Eve 1994, as it was about to come into 1995, possibly 93, 94. But it'd be interesting to go. It was the Winter Park Police Department. If you have any listeners in Winter Park, Florida, it was New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, 1994, 1995. It would be interesting to see that police report from that night. But yeah, that was. Were you alive? You weren't even alive in 1994.
I was about to say if it was later, I definitely for my birthday wish would have been like, can Steve Cantwell live through this so I can have him on my podcast later in life? I would have stopped wishing for superpowers at the beginning. I think I did that for the first 15 years, and I was like, I'm not getting any superpowers. That ain't happening.
You never know. Maybe it takes a while.
Maybe I just got to do enough salvia, right? Now, do you recommend it? Like, because honestly,
No.
Not even once, because I've heard some people take it and they're like, it was a good 45-second thing. I'm like, everything I've heard from my cousin and you has been, you've been gone for 30 years. I'm like, that's definitely something I want to take on my deathbed just to make it last longer.
I would take it on my deathbed again, but that's really the only time I would take. It's not a recreational drug. It's a dump everything in your backpack in the ditch and just go through it all by flashlight and stuff what you can back in your knapsack. It's that kind of experience. It's not fun. I can't say that I had fun. The only fun that I had on that salvia trip has been the telling of the story after, you know, because the being on the drug was misery.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, just to think of all those things you're questioning and everything about yourself too is completely insane. I really appreciate you, Steve, for coming out and doing my podcast, man. It really means a lot that I had the chance to be able to at least get the story from the man himself too. But
Yeah,
yeah.
anytime. I really appreciate your energy, and I want to just point out one thing that you are doing very correctly as a person, which is, you know, and I see the people that you get as podcast guests, and you reached out to me. The thing that you're doing correctly in this is that you're daring to believe that you could do this. So you just dare to believe that you can reach out and ask people to be on your podcast, and lo and behold, we're all happy to do it. You know, but if you were not as sure of yourself, and if you didn't believe in yourself and believe in your and if you weren't so confident as a person, it would lead you to be more timid and maybe not ask for the things that you want. The universe, I think that the big lesson that I can say for 50 years, I don't know if I got this from Salvia, is the universe will give you what you consistently ask for. And I think that I see that in you as a person, is you're not afraid to ask to interview people, and shockingly, they're happy to talk to you. So I think
I did feel a little bad
person.
about asking you a couple times. I was like, all right, man, just let me know. Cause I was like, oh, he's bothering him. But then I was figured like, yeah, you're a cool guy. So I was like, he'd tell me no if he didn't want to do it.
No, I'm happy to do it. I would do it again anytime. It's it's just talking on the phone. And the thing about podcasts, I did radio for years. I did commercial radio for years, and I did thousands and thousands and thousands of shows that are all gone now, because you just say it one time and it's just out there in the ether. And if you're not there, don't happen to be tuned into K-Rock on your drive home that day, you just missed the Steve Cantwell show. But podcasts, it takes conversations like this out of the space-time continuum. You and I have this conversation right now, and people will listen to it, but this will exist forever. People will be able to go back and dial into this conversation and dial into those Crab Feast episodes and just podcasts in general, and they'll be able to just experience your show forever. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, both my parents work in radio, and I think that was the first thing when they offered me a spot, like to have like a little segment or something. I was like, I'd rather just do this on my own, to have my own name behind it, me build it up. And also, like, this is the way I do it is just conversation. I listen to so many podcasts, which I think they're all good. But you hear a false character or false voice, someone going, "You're listening to the best of rock." And I'm like, man, that's not me, because I can't do that for an hour to 2 hours. I just want to have conversations with people. Doesn't matter if you have degrees, doesn't matter if you're super famous. I'm like, it's cool to talk to people who are, but we all matter. We all got something to say. And the amount of time I've heard from people from, I have people that send me, I don't know if you can see in the thing, but right there on that bottom shelf is nothing but hot sauces that have been sent to people that are making their own companies, trying to do something in this world, man. And I'm like, hey, shout out to David, Jeff, Josh, all those guys that are in those hot sauce companies. They send me, reach out. They're so happy that I gave them a chance to talk or something. I'm like, dude, I'm not important at all. You have something you want to say. Let's get your voice out there. Let's hear it. And Steve, you've done me the biggest service and come on do the podcast, and I really appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Right on. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.